Alrighty, friends, welcome to the last part of Chapter 4, Part 4 of Tissues. We are going to be going over the last two main tissue types within the body, as well as a little bit into how tissues heal and what those tissues look like as you age. But first, let's talk about some covering and lining membranes. These membranes are kind of a combination of epithelial tissue and connective tissue. They cover pretty broad areas within the body, but they mainly have that epithelial top sheet and an underlying connective sheet or connective tissue. There are three main types of membranes that we're going to talk about. Your cutaneous membrane, that's just your skin. Your mucous membranes, those line all of the hollow organs that open up to your body. So you'll find mucous membranes in your mouth, in your nose, your anus, pretty much anywhere that opens up to a body surface. PowerPoint does not want me to be great. Okay. And those are epithelial sheets that are underlaid with some of that basal lamina propria that we talked about a bit earlier. Okay. And then the last membrane type are the serous membranes. The serous membranes are pretty much all simple squamous epithelium lying on a bed of areolar connective tissue, and they line the closed body cavities. So that's the pleural cavity, the peritoneal cavity, the pericardial cavity, and remember that this peri means around. So these serous membranes tend to line those internal cavities. They also produce this thing called serous fluid, and serous fluid just helps to lubricate. Keep everything moist, reduce friction, etc. All right? So that first membrane type, you got the skin. Skin is a membrane, acts as a barrier, tries to keep the outside out and the inside in. Mucosal membranes, like I said, lines the body cavities. So anywhere that comes out into the air, so you've got your nose, your mouth. You also have some mucous membranes kind of running down your esophagus and some in your lungs. The mucosa of the bronchi of your lungs. And then last, those serous membranes. The serous membranes have two parts to them. They are parietal and visceral. And if you remember, the visceral lining is right up on the edge. Is right up on that organ of interest. And the parietal ones are just on the outside. OOI means organ of interest. Okay? So that's kind of the membranes that encompass the epithelial and connective mashup. Okay? The third main body tissue type is the muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is specialized for contraction and produces movement. Muscle cells are also called muscle fibers, which are also called myocytes. Myo meaning muscle, cyte meaning cell. Okay? It is a composite tissue. It does contain some areolar connective tissue in in addition to that muscle tissue, but we're just going to focus on the muscle tissue part of it. Okay? The cells contain what we call myofilaments, and those myofilaments contain actin and myosin. Actin and myosin are your main movers. Okay? All muscle, you will find, is tightly packed which helps them with like the contractile force that they need. They all contain these myofilaments. And they are all pretty highly vascularized. They need that vascularization because muscles do a lot of work. They do a lot of work. So that vascularization provides nutrients, it provides oxygen so that the muscles can do the job that they need to do. There are 3 distinct types of muscle tissue, that being your cardiac muscle, your skeletal muscle, and your smooth muscle. Your skeletal muscle, we're going to talk about all of these in more detail, don't worry. Your skeletal muscle is voluntary, while your cardiac and your smooth muscle are involuntary. Okay, so we know because we have seen these under the microscope in lab that our muscle tissue, our skeletal muscle at least, has some very distinct features to it. One, it has these things we call striations. Striations are those like kind of lines that you see throughout that muscle tissue. They are banded patterns. Of myofilament arrangements. They are very, very organized. Okay? They have long cylindrical cells. These cells can be over a foot long. Think about that. That is one cell. One cell can be over a foot long. That's kind of crazy. Because those cells can get so long and so big, they have to have more than one nucleus. And we call that multinucleated. It has to have more than one nucleus because since it's so large and so long, not all of that information can get transported from one nucleus all the way to the next cell. You need multiple so that you can kind of communicate all throughout that same muscle cell. Okay? The functions of muscle tissue, of skeletal muscle tissue specifically, is voluntary movement, your ability to pick up your phone or pick up your water bottle or run a marathon or anything like that. Basically, all of the muscles that you think about moving, like your arms, your legs, your head, all of those are all skeletal muscle. They all do voluntary muscle movement. So that's like also manipulation of your environment, moving things around, all that jazz. Facial expressions, your face has so many muscles in it. There's so many muscles in it, it's not even funny. We're going to talk about that when we get to muscles and bones. Okay? Your skeletal muscle is everywhere, pretty much everywhere. Skeletal muscle is attached to your bones. Occasionally you'll get it attached to your skin. Like for an example of that is when you are cold and you get goosebumps. I know that that's not you necessarily thinking about, oh, I'm cold, I should contract these muscles to give myself goosebumps, but it's the same general principle. All right? So this image here is showing you these different muscle fibers, muscle cells. So this is all one muscle cell. This is one muscle cell. This is one muscle cell. So you can see that they're pretty large. They're pretty big, just all up on their own. You can see also that they have many nuclei. Many nuclei. I kind of drew over them in a couple of these. But you can see that we have lots of nuclei. And also that banding pattern that I was talking about, the striations, those are going to be your key factors in identifying skeletal muscle tissue. The next type of tissue that we're going to talk about is cardiac muscle tissue. Its cell types are called cardiomyocytes. Biologists are not creative. Cardio meaning heart, myo meaning muscle, cyte meaning cell. Heart muscle cells, exactly what they say they are. These cells are branching. They do have striations. They're not nearly as prominent as our skeletal muscle cells, but they do exist. They are generally uninucleated. They're not nearly as big and long as our muscle cells, so they don't need to have as many nuclei as our skeletal muscle cells do. And their most special component is what we call these intercalated discs. Intercalated discs allow for communication between cells. And we need those intercalated discs, we need all of these cells to function as a unit so that your heart can accurately and efficiently pump blood. If those cells were all firing at different rates, your heart would fire at different rates, and that wouldn't be good for pumping. Okay? Like I was saying, your cardiac muscle tissue's main function is to contract, to propel blood into your circulatory system. And it occurs, and you find it pretty much only in the walls of the heart. If you're finding cardiomyocytes in other places, there's probably a problem. You should not find those pretty much anywhere besides your heart. And we can see here on this micrograph kind of these branching cells. They're not nearly as big as our muscle cells. This would be one cell that can communicate with another cell. And it has this special piece to it, this intercalated disc, that allows for that communication. You do still see some of those striations in here, but they're not nearly as prominent as in our skeletal muscle cells. Okay? Our final muscle tissue type is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle has no striations, and they're mainly located in the walls of several of your hollow internal structures, like your blood vessels, your digestive system, your bladder. They're kind of spindle-shaped, kind of like this, like that. Almost kind of like those simple squamous epithelium cells. Okay? But they have no striations at all. They also do not have any intercalated discs, and that is what makes them special. Their main job is to propel substances along internal pathways. Again, this is something that's under involuntary control. If you had to think about digesting every single piece of food that you put into your body, I know I wouldn't do it. So that is something that your brain just does for you, and that process is, at least in your digestive system, it's called peristalsis. And like I said a little bit earlier, you find smooth muscle tissue mostly in the walls of your hollow organs. Okay? They're also uninucleated, meaning they only have one nucleus. So you can see these very short spindle-like cells. They form sheets. And you don't see any of those striations in here really. Because your smooth muscle does not need those striations because it doesn't need a lot of force when it's contracting. So striations equal force. But we don't need that here. Okay? So that wraps up muscle tissue for us. And now we're going to move on to our last tissue type, nervous tissue. My favorite, to be honest. Nervous tissue functions to send electrical signaling throughout your body. They have their special job is to carry electrical impulses. Every decision you've ever made, every movement that you make, I'll be watching you. Sorry, no, that was a song. I'm not watching you. But nervous tissue's job is to carry those electrical impulses that usually start or form in your brain or are a reaction based on your environment. Okay? You're mainly going to find them in your brain and spinal cord, but you also have nerves all over your body. Those are mainly sensory nerves, but there's a bunch of other nerves that kind of go throughout your body. So your nervous tissue is everywhere. Your neurons are your biggest players. They're basically the quarterback for my sports friends. And they're the ones that generate and conduct those nerve impulses, those electrical impulses. And your neuroglia, glia means support, do their job of supporting cells through nourishment, insulation, protection, etc. Neuroglia is a general term for many different cell types. So there's not just one single neuroglia cell. There are several. For example, oligodendrocytes, you have astrocytes, and there's definitely some others that I'm not remembering right now. Okay? So like I said, nervous tissue's job is to transmit those electrical signals from sensory receptors to their effectors and vice versa. And they're located in your brain, your spinal cord, all of those nerves, you'll find them everywhere. They're the reason that you can feel temperature, they're the reason that you can feel pressure. All of those things are nerves. A neuron, its cell body, it has mainly three parts to it. It has the cell body, the dendrites, and the axons. And your cell body, also known as the soma, the dendrites, which are kind of tree-like projections that pick up an electrical signal, and then the axon, which sends the signal on its way. And you can kind of remember those by axon, sends away. Use those A's. Okay? Axons send things away. Okay, and that's pretty much it for nervous tissue. We're going to get into a lot more detail about nervous tissue, nerves, where they are, how they function, all of that stuff when we start talking about the nervous system properly later in the semester. So now we are going to shift gears a little bit and talk about how tissues respond to injury. And they do so in a couple of ways. One, they usually create an inflammatory response. That inflammatory response is incredibly nonspecific. It just kind of goes to the area of damage. It's not necessarily going to get specifically the area that has been damaged itself, but all of the surrounding tissues, and so by proxy, the area of damage. Okay? After your inflammatory response, your body mounts an immune response. That immune response takes a lot longer to develop and is very, very specific. Your immune response uses things like your B cells, your T cells, and antibodies to kind of form their attack, their response. Okay? So that inflammatory response, the initial kind of right off the bat, right when you first like get a cut on your skin or anything like that, you're going to get a lot of heat and redness and swelling. You'll also see a bunch of pain in there. That acute inflammation helps your body to, well, the heat helps to kill off bacteria. The redness you get from an influx of blood. And you get that influx of blood because your blood has parts in it, those platelets that I was telling you about earlier, that help clot your blood. Clot. That help clot and block up that area that has been exposed. Okay? The pain is your body's way of saying, hey, something's wrong here, something is not right. And that chemical signaling helps those blood vessels to dilate, which is what gets you that redness. The swelling comes from the excess fluid because your blood has a lot of fluid in it. Histamines, we talked about way, maybe a couple of PowerPoints ago. Histamines help to, Histamines help to increase the permeability of your capillaries, but they also help your body be like, hey, this is where the problem is. So they're kind of the flag on the play. Not on the play, that's wrong. They're just like the little flag that says, hey, here's where the problem is. Okay? So that's the kind of acute inflammation that you'll get right off the bat when you have some sort of injury to the skin or injury to the tissues. Edema is that accumulation of fluid, right? I was talking about how your blood vessels dilate, you get a whole bunch more fluid and lymph and other helpful things that help kind of, close off the wound as it is. And so because of that, you might get what is called edema. Edema is just accumulation of fluid that usually results in swelling. That extra fluid helps dilute the toxins that are secreted by the bacteria. They help bring oxygen and nutrients from the blood, and they bring all of those white blood cells, the T cells, the B cells, the antibodies, to help fight whatever infection might be forming underneath that injury. Okay? Some tissues are better at repairing than others, and some tissues are better at regenerating than others. Regeneration is essentially just the replacement of that destroyed tissue with the same type of tissue. Sometimes you don't necessarily get regeneration. You get the formation of fibrosis. Fibrosis is just scar tissue. It's tissue that, while it may not necessarily be the exact same type of tissue, it's usually just a lot of collagen, fibers, and other fibers that helped bridge the gap. from one edge of the broken skin to the other. Okay? You also get organization. Organization is really just the process of the clot being like after your blood has clotted, that clot gets replaced with granulation tissue. And granulation tissue is just this lightly pink, kind of fibrous tissue. Okay? So this is kind of just going through the stages of that tissue repair. You get that inflammation. Sorry, you might hear my cats in the background. Please ignore them. You might get that inflammation. The blood vessels start to get a little bit leaky because obviously you've ripped the skin. So it starts to throw other things there to help kind of break off or stop that blood from flowing out. That's where you get scabs. Okay? That organization is trying to restore that blood flow, trying to bring in that granulation tissue. Those fibroblasts have to reform that matrix. They have to, rebuild all of the things that were broken from the injury. Macrophages and other phagocytes pull off all the dead and dying cells and other debris. And then the surface epithelial cells start to multiply again and try to build over that granulation tissue. Then you eventually get some regeneration, hopefully. And that regeneration is just everything kind of coming back together, pulling the margins of the wound together, bringing everything back as it was to the best of its ability. Sometimes you don't get that full perfect regeneration, so you might get a little bit of scar tissue. This is kind of in adulthood, throughout life. At the end of your second month of development, so this is alien baby stage, or alien stage 1. Most of the primary tissues have appeared. Most of the major organs are in place. That's kind of where we're at. In adulthood, not a lot of your tissues regenerate. That's kind of what I was saying earlier. But a lot of them still have stem cells, so they can regenerate if they have that capacity. This is the germ layers. We talked about that and what they produce. So as far as capacity for regeneration, your epithelial tissue, your bone connective tissue, your areolar connective tissue, they are really good at regeneration. They are very good at building themselves back up. Okay? Smooth muscle and dense regular connective tissue, they're okay at it. They can do it if they really need to. But it's not going to be the easiest for them. But they can still do it if they really have to. Skeletal muscle and cartilage, they are not very good at regenerating themselves. That's why a muscle tear is a really tough one on your body. And your cardiac muscle cell and your nervous tissue, or your cardiac muscle and your nervous tissue, they basically do no regeneration. So if you lose cardiac muscle, you lose nervous tissue, they're gone. They're probably not coming back. Okay? And all of this regeneration has to do with its essentially its proximity to vascularization. It is both that proximity to vascularization as well as its genetic encoding. Okay? And so kind of throughout through life, as you get older, your epithelia starts to thin. That's why when you see like people in their 70s or 80s, their skin is very thin. It's very delicate. The collagen decreases. your bones, your muscles, your nervous tissue, those all begin to atrophy. Atrophy just means that they get small. Throughout your life. And then poor nutrition and poor circulation lead to poor health of your tissues later on in your life. So it's important to consistently kind of exercise and eat well so that as you get older, the atrophy goes a lot slower. Okay? So eat your greens and go to the gym every once in a while. It'll be good for you. It'll be good for you long term. You may not see the results right now, but it'll be good for you and your tissues long term. And that wraps up the rest of chapter 4. I believe we are going to try to hit the integumentary system next time I see you guys. If not, we can definitely go over and review some of this stuff from chapter 4. And I think that's all I've got for you guys today. Thanks so much and have a great day.